Okay, we got about 5 minutes left before our meeting starts. Everybody, please get into your seats. Turn your cell phones on to silence, please. Okay, everybody, it's 9 o'clock. We'll convene our Friday session, starting off with our rulemaking update from Catherine. Catherine, please take us away, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. For those who don't know me, my name is Catherine Bloom. I'm the division's rulemaking coordinator. And for the benefit of our new commissioner and maybe some other folks in the room or listening online that don't have a lot of familiarity with our rulemaking requirements, I did want to start with one quick reminder about statutory requirements that affect your rulemaking activities. Session Law 2019-198 and General Statute 14-4.1 require that any rule that creates a new criminal offense or otherwise subjects a person to criminal penalties is automatically subject to legislative review before it can become effective. And so you have well over 300 rules And about 1/3 of those are impacted by the laws I just described. And the requirement adds time to the rulemaking process. So I mention this as something to keep in mind as far as managing expectations for the time that it takes to promulgate rules. All right, in your briefing materials in the rulemaking section, you'll see several documents. The first one is a memo, and then several supporting items behind that. And as usual, I'll pause for just a moment if you'd like to turn to that memo and follow along. Today, you'll be asked to vote on final approval of the 20 rules that are remaining in your 2023-2024 rulemaking cycle. You're also scheduled to vote on the management option and associated proposed rulemaking language for the Interstate Wildlife Violator Compact issue paper. And that's so the rulemaking development process can continue and you can be ready to start the formal rulemaking process at your August business meeting. So first we'll start with the 2023-2024 cycle, give you an update on that. At your May meeting last year, you approved notice of text for rulemaking to begin the process for a large package of rules. It had 103 rules in it. And there were 4 different subjects. The 4 subjects are data collection and harassment prevention for the conservation of marine and estuarine resources, oyster sanctuaries, conforming changes for the shellfish relay program and shellfish leases and franchises, and then shellfish plants and inspections. There is a table showing the steps in the process that have occurred up to this point for this package. That's in your briefing materials. There was a news release last year on August 1st, and the proposed rules were published in the August 1st issue of the North Carolina Register, and that started the public comment process. All of those documents are available for you in your materials. So you accepted public comments through October 2nd of last year, and then we did hold a public hearing via WebEx with a listening station at the Division Central District Office in Morehead City. That was August 16th. And I know Commissioner Huggins is listening online, so I did want to give him a shout out. He served as the hearing officer for that, and we appreciate that assistance. There were 2 written public comments submitted about the package of rules as a whole, and then 1 member of the public provided comment at the hearing. So the table in the briefing materials contains those written comments, and then there's also a summary of the hearing, and that captures the 1 commenter from the hearing itself. So you actually heard all of this before if you're having deja vu. I had to tell you all this in November because you voted to give final approval to 83 of the 103 rules, and those were all related to shellfish, plants, and inspections. And we needed to do that then to meet readoption deadlines. That was actually the last of your rule readoptions. 80 of the 83 rules are already effective. They became effective April 1st of this year, and those were put in the supplement to your publication of rules on April 1st. There are 3 rules left from that group. They are automatically subject to legislative review. They are available currently in the short session, and so I'll keep you posted on the outcome of those, give you an update at your August meeting. So that leaves us 20 rules. And those are here for your final approval today, and they do pertain to all 4 of the subjects, data collection and harassment prevention, oyster sanctuaries, and then conforming changes for a variety of the shellfish rules. So I am going to briefly summarize these subjects to make sure that you have that information again to consider the final approval of the rules today. Due to the increasing occurrence and severity of harassment during division data collection initiatives and decreasing participation in data collection, amendments are proposed to 5 of your rules. Those proposed amendments set requirements to address harassment of division employees by any licensee or person engaged in regulated activity under Chapter 113, Subchapter 4 of the General Statutes, essentially fishing. So anyone fishing. And when that data collection is occurring and this harassment occurs in the process of obtaining data, either for the conservation of marine and estuarine resources or for the protection of public health related to the public health programs that fall under this Commission's authority. So additional amendments provide the types of data that may be collected, and the amendments support the importance of participation by persons engaged in that regulated fishing activity in our data collection programs. They also, importantly, provide a safer working environment for division employees. There was one written public comment opposing these rules. The next subject is oyster sanctuary rule changes, and proposed amendments add the boundaries of the 2 newest oyster sanctuaries and then correct boundaries for 3 other sanctuaries. And that's where published coordinates were found to be inconsistent with the permitted and marked boundaries. These changes to permanent rule would protect oysters from bottom disturbing gear so they can serve their intended management function as oyster broodstock sanctuaries, as well as safeguard boaters that are navigating the sanctuaries. Now, these changes are already in place via the Fishery Director's Proclamation Authority, but we need to codify that in permanent rule. There are additional changes for 3 sanctuaries. It's really a housekeeping issue. We recognize that they were not listed in standardized cardinal directions. So we're just moving the chairs around for consistency. There's no changes to the overall sanctuaries nor the coordinate pairs that create that description of the sanctuary. There were no public comments submitted about this rule. The third subject is conforming rule changes for 3 things: the Shellfish Relay Program, shellfish leases and franchises, and shellfish sanitation. So the first part is about the Shellfish Relay Program. And in 2021, the division began the process of discontinuing its Shellfish Relay Program due primarily to insufficient resources to run it and also lack of widespread use. The Shellfish Relay Program is for the relaying of shellfish from certain polluted areas. Some people know it by the name Polluted Area Relay. Now, this is all different from relay activities for seed oyster management areas, or SOMAs. That's remaining in place. That's not what we're talking about here. So the Shellfish Relay Program, otherwise known as Polluted Area Relay, ended May 1st of this year. And you received information about the discontinuation of this program at your February 2022 business meeting, and then you've received updates since then. The division identified 11 of your rules relating to the Shellfish Relay Program, and changes are proposed to either amend portions of rules or repeal rules entirely, consistent with the rulemaking requirements in the Administrative Procedure Act. There was one commenter at the public hearing that spoke against phasing out the Shellfish Relay Program. Again, to clarify, the Shellfish Relay Program has ended. The proposed rule changes merely clean up what are now outdated requirements. The second part of this subject is about shellfish leases and franchises. Changes for shellfish lease and franchise requirements are proposed to a single rule, 15A NCAC 030-0201, and that's to conform to requirements of Session Law 2019-37. This was the aquaculture bill. The long title was an act to provide further support to the shellfish aquaculture industry in North Carolina. Specifically, changes incorporate and conform to the shellfish and franchise production and planting requirements from that session law. And this applies to shellfish leases granted before July 1st, 2019, that have not gone through its 10-year renewal yet. It also applies to franchises, shellfish leases granted before July 1, 2019 that have gone through the 10-year renewal, and then shellfish leases that have been granted after July 1, 2019. And Zach talked to you about this yesterday. He had some comments in his presentation. So this should sound familiar. Additional proposed changes to this one rule require shellfish lease or franchise holders to meet the listed production, marking, and permit requirements for current shellfish leases before being eligible for additional lease acreage. And there was one written public comment submitted opposing these shellfish leases generally. So recently, the division director and several commissioners received information from a stakeholder about potential legislation in the 2024 short session, the current session, to address perpetual franchises and termination procedures. And that's so the rulemaking update now, I had to add a little more detail to acknowledge that activity. So as I said last year, you proposed these amendments to Rule 030-0201 to conform to the session law. The requirements in the session law are twofold. The first is the requirements in Section 3C of that law for production of shellfish or purchase of shellfish seed for franchises, shellfish bottom leases, and water column leases. So the session law requires that be added to the rule. This may also ring a bell with Zach's presentation where he talked about the constraints that the laws put on basically copying and pasting. Do you remember that part of his presentation about copying and pasting pieces of the law into a rule? That's what I'm talking about here. Another section in that law, Section 3A, contains definitions for extensive shellfish culture and intensive shellfish culture. Now, these definitions directly relate to the requirements for purchase of shellfish seed, and so they are required to be added to your rule since the whole section of that session law expires upon adoption of your rule. So we need to carry those definitions into your rule as well. So beyond conforming to the requirements of the session law, you proposed additional amendments that I mentioned already to that same rule. Now, the amendments are consistent with the user conflict study that Zach mentioned yesterday as well. And that study was by the Department of Environmental Quality, Division of Marine Fisheries, and Marine Fisheries Commission, and it was completed in November of 2019. So many of the rule changes that you have been doing to your shellfish lease rules have occurred due to the outcome of that user conflict study. And the study was also required by this same session law, 2019-37. So the amendments included in 00201 under the consistent with that study are the addition of updated definitions for plant and produce, and that's to clarify the use of those terms for both stakeholders and resource managers. Subparagraph B4 of the rule contains proposed amendments to clarify what the word area refers to in regard to cumulative impacts. So that's an important clarification to make full advantage of using the cumulative impacts to manage user conflicts. And then proposed amendments to paragraph I is where we require shellfish leaseholders to meet the listed production, marking, and permit requirements for the current leases before being eligible for additional lease acreage. And that was added to help ensure more efficient and meaningful use of the public trust bottom by preventing persons that are not in good standing from precluding potential applicants from applying for a shellfish lease in affected areas. So importantly, this one rule, 00201, is part of a package of 12 commission rules. The rest of the rules are about retiring the shellfish relay requirements. And they were evaluated in a single fiscal impact analysis that was approved by the Office of State Budget and Management, or OSBM, and that's required under the Administrative Procedure Act. The analysis considers all proposed amendments and repeals as a group. And so the proposed rules and the OSBM approved fiscal analysis were available for review and comment during the public comment period last fall that was from August 1st through October 2nd. So per the Administrative Procedure Act, any rule that differs substantially from the original publication must undergo these time-intensive steps again. So at this point in the update, I believe your counsel, Christine Ryan, just had a few remarks to share with you before I continue.
Thanks, Catherine. Just wanted to remind everyone that we are required to follow existing session laws as passed by the General Assembly. So for example, if there's a pending bill that says anything about shellfish leases or fisheries or what have you, we can't follow that until it becomes an actual passed session law. The session law that Catherine referenced, 2019-37, says that we shall, and that's not, there's no wiggle room in the word shall, we shall pass these rules to comply with the requirements of the statute. So as of today, any pending bill before the General Assembly is not incumbent upon us to follow, can't think of the right word, we have to follow the laws that have been passed. If there's a bill that ends up becoming a session law later on in the summer, we'll go back and start the rulemaking process over again, and we'll comply with whatever that session law says. But as of right now, we need to vote to go forward on 030-0201 because that will keep us in compliance with 2019-37. Does that make sense to everybody? Just wanted to kind of pop that in there. Yes, sir.
So my question is, and it's probably more at Catherine, so in that session rule or whatever it is, so the relay program was not in that. Relay, on your list, relay program is different, because if this all comes up in a block, I won't be voting for it. I don't care what the legislator said, because I've been relaying oysters since about 1986, when the division started it, and they used to pay us $2 a basket to put it on their barge so we could enhance our resource down there. And since that time, to my knowledge, the oyster relay program has not had anybody get sick from any oysters it's got. So about 5 years ago, it came up that we had not enough, I guess the feds told us they wanted officers to follow us, because from 1980s till 5 years ago, we would just move the oysters, and we didn't ever have any problems. And about 5 years ago, because of so many water column leases, I was told, the division decided that we didn't need to do that no more, because we had to have officers go with us when we moved oysters, and we had specific times, and a lot of times those times don't coincide with when we could move the oysters. So this is something that's been around a long time, and I've used it since the 80s in my leases. A bunch of guys down my way do, because we sell bushel oysters, we don't sell single oysters. And it's something that shouldn't be going away, because we don't need enforcement to follow us. We've proven that over a 35-year period. So if that legislative rule is in this block, I won't be voting for it, because the oyster relay is in there. I just want to let everybody know why I'm not voting for it. Thank you.
So I described the fiscal note, and that analyzed all of the rules together. So all 12 rules are covered by the same fiscal note. The session law is only in regards to Rule 00201. It does not intersect with the shellfish relay requirements. The 11 rules retiring the requirements for shellfish relay are not related to the session law. That is from a division decision in 2022 to retire the program. And so at your February meeting in 2022, the division announced that was coming to an end, and it would be phased out over 3 years. And so the spring of 22, 23, and then this year was the last of the 3 years, ending on May 1st. That decision was made by the division due to lack of resources, lack of people, as well as lack of widespread use. And I understand there are some people that have taken advantage of the relay season each of the 3 years, and it is important to them, and we acknowledge that. However, it is not widespread use, and the lack of resources at the division, as well as the FDA requirements. It's not just a state-level decision to have Marine Patrol be part of that relay activity. So not trying to get contrary with you, Commissioner Corbett, just giving you some additional details, because I know at that point you were not on the commission.
And once again, we've been doing that for 35 or 40 years before Marine Patrol had to follow us. Never a person ever got sick. Never anybody ever tried to sell a polluted oyster while they were moving it to their lease. And we were able to do it from Monday through Friday, from daylight till dark, and there was never an issue until we got so many water column leases. And it's my understanding that it was because they sell oysters all year round, and most of us bottom lease guys never did, that they was afraid there would be a conflict then. And Kathy wasn't the director then, that was somebody else when all this started. And so, like I say, if these rules were all in there at one, I won't be voting for it. If we can vote on the session law separate, then I'll gladly vote for the session law, but I won't be voting for whatever is to doing away with that, because I intend on trying to get it back.
And Mr. Chairman, I believe Patricia is prepared if the body would like to approach the approvals as, pieces or as a whole, however you'd like to do it. I think Patricia is prepared for that.
Okay, great.
Okay. So I just had a couple little things, and then that action item will be ready for you. There was just one little tiny part of that third subject of conforming changes, and those are related to shellfish sanitation. There were just minor conforming amendments to 2 rules that were not subject to readoption. One is 15A NCAC 03K 0110 and 18A 0302, Both of those, the changes related to shellfish sanitation. There were no public comments submitted about these rules, but they are also before you for final action. So we've got those 20 rules from your 23-24 cycle. If approved, the rules would be submitted to the Rules Review Commission. The Oyster Sanctuaries Rule 03R 0117 and the Shellfish Sanitation Permits Rule 18A 0302, those are not automatically subject to legislative review, so they could be effective as early as August 1st. The other 18 rules are automatically subject, and so those will have to wait for the start of the 2025 long session for review. So obviously, those would have a delayed effective date. And as I said, I think Patricia's prepared however you'd like to proceed as far as a group or break them out. Even within the subjects, we can break out the 1 rule and the 11 rules.
Okay. Questions or comments? Anybody?
Rob, you don't have to break them out for me
Yeah.
because
I'm
vote as a whole,
I'm
and I'll
gonna vote them
vote
as a
no.
package.
And
That's
then when I go to talk to the legislators I talk to, I can explain to them why I voted no.
That sounds fine to me.
That works for me.
Okay, Chair is looking for a motion to approve the rules of the 2023-2024 rulemaking cycle as a whole. Is there such a motion? Anybody?
I'll make that motion, Mr.
Thank
Chairman.
you. Okay, is there a second?
I'll second.
Second. Who seconded it? Okay, Commissioner Hopkins seconded it. Any other discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Bethea,
Nay.
Commissioner Blanton,
No.
Commissioner Corbett, Commissioner Gardner, Commissioner Hopgood, Commissioner Huggins,
Nay.
Commissioner Rader,
Aye.
Commissioner Roller,
Aye.
Chairman Bizzle.
Aye. Rules are approved 5-4. Y'all messed me up. I was going for all unanimous approval this weekend, but we didn't get it, but that's okay. Yeah, did it yesterday. Okay,
All right,
Catherine,
that
carry
was
on.
part 1. So the part 2 is your upcoming cycle, 2024-2025. So at your February meeting, we provided a preview of potential rules in this cycle, including rules to implement the Interstate Wildlife Violator Compact. So this cycle is scheduled to begin the process at your August business meeting, and there's a table of the steps in the process in your briefing materials. The management option and associated proposed language for rulemaking, we need your endorsement today so that we can proceed with development of the required fiscal analysis of the proposed rules. And then you'll be ready to start the formal process at your August meeting if we can obtain that fiscal analysis from the Office of State Budget and Management. These rules would have an earliest effective date of May 1st of next year. They are not automatically subject to legislative review. There's also a table in your material summarizing the paper itself, and then the issue paper, the full document, is behind that table. In the issue paper, I would encourage you to turn to page 7. You'll find table 2 there, and that will come in handy later in my remarks as far as some examples that we'll walk through. So at this point, I'm going to move chairs and walk through a PowerPoint presentation. Give me just a second here as I switch gears. Okay, so in the presentation, I'm going to give an overview of the Interstate Wildlife Violator Compact and then take any questions that you have. Major Jason Walker of the North Carolina Marine Patrol is also here to answer any questions. I do want to acknowledge the hard work of Major Walker, Captain Garland Yop, Gina Griffin, Sean Meyer, Sergeant Brian Long, and Tina Moore, all of whom contributed to this issue paper and the development of the proposed rules. This has been underway for close to a solid year. It's a complex set of rules, and so it's been a little bigger lift than some other issues. So I did want to take a second to acknowledge them. So here's an outline of the presentation and the topics that we'll cover. What is the Interstate Wildlife Violator Compact? Where did it come from? I'll cover some fundamentals of the compact, and then next we'll take a look at some considerations for the development of Marine Fisheries Commission rules. Then we'll review what operation under the compact looks like, and we'll walk through some examples that are referred to already. Those examples are of suspension of a person's licenses and permits and how the ratification process works. And we'll talk about the role of the compact administrator, and then lastly, I'll cover the division's recommendation and next steps in the process. All right, what is the compact? The Interstate Wildlife Violator Compact is also referred to as the WVC or Compact. It's a voluntary interstate agreement that provides participating states with a mechanism for a reciprocal program to do two things. One is promote compliance with the statutes, laws, and regulations pertaining to management of wildlife resources in their respective states, and also to provide for the fair and impartial treatment of wildlife violators operating within the participating states in recognition of the individual's right of due process and the sovereign status of a party state. North Carolina's participation in the compact has been enacted into state law, so it must be implemented and enforced. Article 22B of Chapter 113 includes General Statute 113-300.7, and this requires the Wildlife Resources Commission and the Marine Fisheries Commission to adopt rules necessary to carry out the purpose of the compact. The Wildlife Resources Commission has already adopted its rules, and now it's your turn. It's important to understand, for the purposes of the compact, wildlife includes marine and estuarine resources managed by the Marine Fisheries Commission and the Division of Marine Fisheries. That may not be intuitive, but that is covered in the law. So in other words, it covers the fish under your authority. The word wildlife means fish. So the proposed Marine Fishery Commission rules have been developed to protect these wildlife resources and treat violators fairly between member states. Let's talk about where the compact came from and when it started. The compact is a nationwide effort to apply requirements across state borders for wildlife violators, including hunting, trapping, and fishing. It puts consequences in place for those people that visit other states that they're not residents of, who break the law, and then return back to their home state. The concept of a wildlife violator compact was first advanced in the early 1980s by Western states that were discussing the format of existing documents related to motor vehicle operator licensing and enforcement. Compact legislation was passed into law in Colorado, Nevada, and Oregon in 1989. These three states formed the nucleus for the development of the operational procedures of the current Interstate Wildlife Violator Compact. So let's fast forward to 2008, when the North Carolina General Assembly passed a law requiring North Carolina to enter into the compact. Initially, it did not include marine and estuarine fish, but in 2009, the General Assembly passed a second law that added the Marine Fisheries Commission and the Division of Marine Fisheries to the compact, and it added all species of animals that you protect or regulate to the definition of wildlife. So not just the warm and fuzzy animals, but the cold and slimy ones too. As of 2024, the compact has 49 member states, including North Carolina, with Hawaii in the process of joining. And Massachusetts recently joined the compact and is working to implement the requirements in their state. So an understanding of the compact is, of how the compact is administered and operates is enhanced if you grasp the concept that the currency that the compact uses is suspensions of licenses and permits, not violations. So conviction of a violation can lead to the suspension of a person's licenses and permits. Failure to appear, known as FTA, and failure to comply, known as FTC, these can also lead to license and permit suspension. So these can be outcomes related to a violation where a person must appear before a judge or comply with a judgment from a court, like paying a fine, serving community service, time served, or paying restitution. If the person doesn't do what they were told to do, it can lead to license and permit suspension. And then suspension of licenses and permits can be ratified under the compact. So we're going to run through that one more time with this little figure on the screen. So a person's issued a citation for a violation. If they are convicted of that violation, it can then lead to suspension of that person's licenses and permits, and the suspension can be ratified under the compact. Similarly, if a person has a violation and they have to appear before a judge, but they fail to appear, or FTA, it can lead to license and permit suspension, which can be ratified under the compact. Just keep flowing across the bottom. Or if a person with a violation opts to pay a fine, for example, instead of appearing before a judge because they don't want to go back to where they were on vacation when this happened, essentially they are pleading guilty to the violation, but if they don't follow through or fail to comply, FTC, that also can lead to license and permit suspension, which can be ratified under the compact. So I'm really pausing on these points because this is the heart of how the Wildlife Violator Compact operates. All right, so once these things occur, the person must address the terms of their violation so the suspension can be removed from the compact. Addressing the terms of the violation, as I mentioned on the previous slide, it can be a fine, community service, time served, paying restitution. There's a variety of outcomes that can occur. That person would need to provide documentation of compliance to the member state that issued the suspension so that the suspension can be removed from the compact, and then the person's license, privileges, and products can be returned. North Carolina's participation in the compact gives North Carolina agencies a mechanism to increase accountability on wildlife violators who have been suspended in other jurisdictions. The adoption of Marine Fishery Commission rules would allow the Division of Marine Fisheries to hold those wildlife violators accountable and provide more opportunity and flexibility for North Carolina Marine Patrol officers to treat non-residents as they would a North Carolina resident. By providing a mechanism to suspend licenses in outside jurisdictions, there's a consequence for those charged should they fail to appear in court or fail to comply with the terms of their violation. That serves as a deterrent for wildlife violators from outside jurisdictions. So in other words, adoption of this commission's compact rules would result in Marine Patrol being able to treat all wildlife violators equally, regardless of their state residency. So we're going to switch to a few rulemaking considerations. As I said, the compact requires the Wildlife Resources Commission and the Marine Fisheries Commission to adopt rules necessary to carry out the purpose of the compact. When the Wildlife Resources Commission adopted its rules, the state of North Carolina was officially entered into the compact. As I said, now it's the Marine Fishery Commission's turn. So while North Carolina as a whole is in compliance with the compact, since we are a state with 2 management agencies, there were several additional complexities that staff needed to consider. These initial considerations included determining how a suspension from recreational activities would affect a commercial license holder, whether commercial licenses would be considered at all, and if the Marine Fisheries Commission and the Division of Marine Fisheries could opt out of the compact. Also, charging language or violations, they differ from one state to another, so it could be difficult to apply in North Carolina. Division staff have done a lot of research into these and many other questions to develop your proposed rules. The North Carolina legislation for the compact does not distinguish between recreational and commercial licenses. By not excluding commercial licenses in the legislation, the North Carolina General Assembly has opted to include commercial licenses in the compact. So that is embedded in the law. As a compact member, the Division of Marine Fisheries would be required to communicate all license and permit suspension information through the compact database to other participating states and to determine if any suspension of licenses and permits from another member state could have led to license and permit suspension here. If so, the licensing agency, be it the Wildlife Resources Commission or the Division of Marine Fisheries, would issue an administrative suspension to that North Carolina license holder. All convictions for marine fisheries violations have a cumulative count towards suspension within a 3-year period. North Carolina's rules and statutes for marine fisheries suspensions also affect all the products, in other words, licenses and permits, everything that a person holds, both commercial and recreational. In contrast, most Wildlife Resources Commission suspensions are for a single violation, and for that reason, the Wildlife Resources Commission only ratifies certain suspensions that would result in a suspension in North Carolina. Let's shift to talking about operation under the compact. Although the Wildlife Resources Commission's rules have been in place since 2017, efforts to develop the Marine Fishery Commission rules and processes to enact the compact have moved slowly as division staff have worked to address all of these concerns. They are complex. Currently, with the Wildlife Resources Commission actively participating in the compact, but the Marine Fisheries Commission and the Division of Marine Fisheries are not participating, the division has no voice or knowledge of suspensions for other states being ratified or suspensions in North Carolina being entered by the Wildlife Resources Commission on behalf of the state of North Carolina. At a minimum, by the Marine Fisheries Commission adopting rules and the Division of Marine Fisheries operating under the compact, the division would have the ability to gain knowledge of wildlife violators that have product suspensions and enter those suspensions so that North Carolina Marine Patrol officers could act to address those suspensions. The compact provides for flexibility in addressing differences in charging language or violations in other states and how to apply them here, as well as impacts to North Carolina commercial license holders. The compact provides a member state with latitude to apply suspensions only for similar offenses and license types, providing consideration for the variability of in-state charging penalties. As suspensions from member states are entered into the compact database, they would be recommended to be ratified or not ratified by the Division of Marine Fisheries based upon the similarity of the offense and license type as those relate to North Carolina laws and rules. But the length of the suspension would be set by the out-of-state jurisdiction. That cannot be altered. So, for example, if another member state entered a violation and subsequent saltwater license suspension of 1 year in the compact, if the offense and license type as relates to North Carolina laws and rules was similar, the division would recommend ratifying the other state's suspension in North Carolina, and the 1-year suspension would be recognized for that person's North Carolina marine and estuarine licenses and permits. For the inverse scenario, North Carolina suspensions that are entered into the compact would be reviewed by other member states as to the fit and similarity of a state's current laws or rules. And then those member states would decide to ratify or not ratify the North Carolina suspension. In North Carolina, by state law, the final decision to ratify or to not ratify rests with the compact administrator, and I'll cover that more fully in another slide. So at the beginning of the presentation, I encourage you to turn to page 7 of the issue paper to be ready to refer to Table 2. Table 2 is on the slide, but of course it's very small. So if you want to take a moment and just follow along, we're going to walk through 3 examples together. So again, in your rulemaking section, you'll see there's a memo and then several materials behind that. There'll be a landscape table that is summarizing the paper. And then behind the landscape table, just a 1-page, is a multi-page issue paper. And then we're talking about page 7, you should see table 2. And still see some pages turning, so I'm just going to wait a moment here. I think Jesse's going to take a peek. All right. So there's the 1-page table and then the traditional portrait landscape issue paper, multiple pages, and it's page 7 of the issue paper. All right. So there are numerous examples here of wildlife violations and how those would be considered by the division and then potentially applied to North Carolina license holders. And just, again, remember, wildlife includes fish. So colloquially speaking, This table demonstrates the differences between suspensions for the aquarium versus suspensions for the zoo. Think about it in those terms. So for example, on the 5th row of the table, if a North Carolina resident was hunting in Colorado and was convicted of illegal harvest of a deer that led to suspension of all licenses of all types in Colorado, and that North Carolina resident holds a commercial fish dealer's license, the division would not recommend that the dealer's license be suspended in North Carolina because the nature of the violation and the license type suspended do not match up. One is in the zoo and the other is in the aquarium. So another example, this one's on the last row of the table. This could be for a North Carolina resident with a violation in Georgia for failure to appear that led to suspension of all fishing licenses of all types in Georgia. And that North Carolina resident holds a North Carolina recreational commercial gear license and a shellfish license. In this example, the division would recommend the North Carolina resident's North Carolina licenses be suspended until the violation was addressed with the court in Georgia, and then that violation and the license type suspended, they match up. And so that's why it would be recommended for suspension here. And until that person addressed the terms of their violation in Georgia, and that suspension was removed from the compact from the member state, Georgia, then it would be removed here, right? So a final example is for a non-resident that holds a North Carolina coastal recreational fishing license. So someone who doesn't live here but comes here to fish. If that person was convicted of taking an endangered species, like an alligator in Florida, that led to suspension of all licenses of all types in Florida. This example is, I think it's on the next to last row. And so the division in this case would recommend that the non-resident's coastal recreational fishing license be suspended for the same duration as in Florida due to the egregiousness of the offense. So again, there's several examples here. We tried to carve out a lot of different scenarios, but it does take some time to walk through each one and think about how one example compares to the next. But I do encourage you to do that. This also gets to the process of cooperation between the Division of Marine Fisheries and the Wildlife Resources Commission on making these determinations so that they're done in a consistent manner over time. So a couple slides ago, I mentioned I'd explain more about the role of the compact administrator. Oh, yes.
Excuse me, Scott, we've got a question up here.
Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt, but I do have some clarification back on this. So I see a couple things here, like the instance where there's the example of Idaho. And so the violation type says assault. Now, I'm not sure why that would qualify to be put in the compact or as a wildlife violation or anything of such. So I just can't understand how that would apply. And so that's my question.
Thank you, Commissioner Blanton, and I appreciate your attention to detail. You found the one error in the issue paper that we corrected on the PowerPoint slide. So great
You're named
job.
Commissioner of the Day.
So in the issue paper, for the Idaho example, it simply says assault. And what we failed to include is an important detail is not general assault, like assault and battery or something like that, but assault on a wildlife officer. And so that is what would qualify as an egregious offense that then would be considered here with the similar license type and similar offense type. So kudos to you, sir. Yes, sir. All right, so we'll get back to the compact administrator because this really pulls things together for how the two agencies continue to work together. By North Carolina law, that statute I mentioned, 113-300.7, the compact administrator is to be appointed by the chair of the Wildlife Resources Commission in consultation with the chair of the Marine Fisheries Commission and the Division of Marine Fisheries Director. So all of that is prescribed in that law. The Compact Administrator for North Carolina serves at the pleasure of the Wildlife Resources Commission Chair, and that is currently the Wildlife Colonel, Ben Meyer. The North Carolina Marine Patrol staff have already begun discussions over this past year to develop these internal processes with the Wildlife Resources Commission's enforcement staff to coordinate continued administration of the compact requirements and do so as consistently and efficiently as possible. Again, over time, people change. We need processes to remain consistent. As I said also in a previous slide, in North Carolina by state law, the final decision to ratify or not ratify a suspension rests with the compact administrator. So I was careful in my selection of wording running through those examples about what the division would recommend. And these are why it's important to work out these processes, because the compact administrator does have the final say. Discussions between Marine Patrol Major Jason Walker and Wildlife Colonel Ben Meyer include the distinction between fisheries suspensions, the aquarium, and wildlife suspensions, or the zoo, under the compact. The decision-making for egregious offenses like taking an endangered animal or assault on a Marine Patrol or wildlife officer, as well as administrative offenses like a person failing to appear in court to address their violation. Those are examples where collaboration between the agencies is key to consistent administration under the compact in North Carolina. So the division's recommendation is approval of the single management option and associated proposed language for rulemaking presented in the Interstate Wildlife Violator Compact issue paper. And that's so the rulemaking process, the development process can continue with that fiscal analysis. Now, doing this would allow the commission and the division to pursue the necessary steps to comply with the statutory requirement to participate in the Interstate Wildlife Violator Compact. Most of the times when we bring you an issue paper, there's a suite of options. In this case, there's a single option because that is what would enable both agencies, the commission and the division, to comply with the mandates of the law. So today you're scheduled to vote to endorse the management option of associated proposed language for rulemaking in the paper, and again, so that we can proceed with the fiscal analysis process over the summer. And the proposed rules and the Office of State Budget and Management approved fiscal analysis, that's what we need to get to be able to start the rulemaking process at your August meeting. The public comment period and public hearing, if you continue to approve these steps, that would be in the fall of this year, 2024. You would receive the outcome of that public comment period at your February 2025 business meeting, and that would be to inform your vote on final approval of the rules. If approved, the rules would be submitted to the Rules Review Commission for its April 2025 meeting. The earliest effective date of the rules would be May 1 of next year. Again, these rules are not automatically subject to legislative review. Importantly, embedded in the rule language, the rules would not apply to any offenses committed in North Carolina or any other compact state until July 1st, 2025. And so that's a clean break with the fiscal year, which is how licenses are administered, at least for the commercial licenses. So regardless of if the rule became effective May 1st, June 1st, July 1st, it wouldn't start applying until July 1, so that it would be a whole license year. And that finally, Mr. Chairman, concludes the rulemaking update. I'm glad to take any questions.
Thank you, Catherine. Commissioner Blanton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just curious, and this is a question probably for Marine Patrol, because we have the Commercial License Eligibility Board, and so we have out-of-state applicants. And so my question is, for the process of the eligibility board, I'm assuming that this compact, joining this compact would allow for the processing beforehand of our packet that we get. It would be addressed that whatever applicant was checked over in the compact, and that information be given to the eligibility board, I'm assuming.
Yes, sir.
Or does that just disqualify their packet to even be brought to the board? And so that was my question of how that would end up playing out. Because often, we get skinny information sometimes, and so it's just borderline enough to approve sometimes. So what I'm saying is that the more complete the packet is, and the more information we got ahead of time, helps us tremendously make our decision whether the applicant qualifies or not. So I'm just curious to know how this is added to the process of that eligibility board.
Yes, sir. That's a keen observation, and it's always bothered me that we have not been able to consider out-of-state violations or suspensions for our own process when we do hold our own citizens accountable. So if they come from, another state, we're not, by rule, we don't have that reach to consider, Virginia or New York's violations. But with this compact, by entering this compact, we will have a process so that we can run those records ahead of time. If they are suspended in another jurisdiction, then they would be disqualified ahead of time. So you would not get that packet.
Thank you for that clarification. I just wanted to kind of understand how that division was going to add that to the eligibility board process. Thank you.
Right. Any other questions or comments? I personally think this is a great thing. So if there be no other questions or comments, the chair would entertain a motion to accept the management options associated with proposed language for rulemaking for the Interstate Wildlife Violator Compact issue paper. Is there such a motion?
So moved.
Commissioner Roller.
And seconded.
By Commissioner Rader. Any other discussion? Roll call, please.
Commissioner Bethea,
Aye.
Commissioner Blanton, Commissioner Corbett, Commissioner Gardner, Commissioner Hopgood, Commissioner Huggins, Commissioner Rader,
Aye.
Commissioner Roller,
Aye.
and Chairman Bizzle.
Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Back on track. Okay. Thank you, Catherine. It's a lot of hard work, and I appreciate what you do with it. Okay. Most of y'all know that we have a federal issue dealing with the North Atlantic right whale and vessel strikes. This issue has been out there for a while, and I've been getting a lot of comments recently, or questions about it recently. So I wanted us to have a presentation on it, and we'll go from there. So if you would, thank you very much.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Yes, for your request, I'm going to just give a really brief presentation on the status of NOAA Fisheries' proposed amendment to the right whale ship strike reduction rule. That's a mouthful a little bit. Before we start, just to give some context for some of you at the table that may not know, North Atlantic right whales are critically endangered. There are only about 360 of them left in the population, and vessel strikes are one of the factors that is hampering their rebounding for the population. And also, before we talk about the proposed amendments, I also wanted to just take a moment and remind ourselves about the current ship strike reduction rule. Sorry, I'll trip over that a little bit. The current rule was implemented in 2008, and it outlines several areas where vessels 65 feet or greater must travel at 10 knots or less. There are several safety considerations in that rule, for search and rescue operations, for example, weather considerations, and a part of that also provides voluntary occasional dynamic management areas or slow zones where they've detected right whales either visually from aerial or shipboard surveys, or detected them or heard them acoustically from receivers that NOAA Fisheries puts up and down the coast. And for the current rule, those slow zones are voluntary, and that'll become important in a moment. So for North Carolina, there are 2 areas that are included in this rule where these restrictions occur, and those restrictions occur from November 1st through April 30th. One of those areas is Oceanside of the Morehead City Port. The other one is in southern North Carolina and extends into Georgia. And part of the reason why it extends that far into Georgia is that is where some right whale calving occurs. So in July of 2022, NOAA Fisheries announced proposed change, to the North Atlantic right whale vessel speed rule to further reduce the likelihood of lethal vessel collisions. These amendments include changes to the boundaries of the seasonal management areas, which occur from Massachusetts to Florida, and it also proposed to rename them seasonal speed zones, and I'll show a map of those boundaries for North Carolina in just a moment. But importantly, this proposed rule also expands the vessel size that must comply with the rule, and the proposed rule includes vessels that would be 35 feet or greater. Also, importantly, is that with this proposed rule, it would create mandatory and not voluntary dynamic speed zones. So when they detect right whales visually or acoustically, like there's one right now going off Virginia Beach, I think, then those speed zones outside of the predetermined calendar dates would become mandatory. The proposed rule did update the safety deviation provision as well to make things more clear. So, oh look, the map didn't show up. Hey, let's put it there. Okay. So this map is just really kind of zooming in on North Carolina, and it shows the proposed seasonal speed zones and the dates that those speed restrictions would apply. So as you can see, the entire coast would be subject to these speed restrictions starting November 1st. And then there's some variation of when those restrictions would end, whether it be mid-April in the southern part of the state, the end of April in the middle of the state, and then the end of May in northern North Carolina. And those dates are supposed to overlap with the peak migration of right whales through the area. The public comment period on the proposed rule was initially set to close at the end of September of 2022. It was extended another month and closed end of October 2022. There were more than 90,000 public comments, and obviously that took a long time for NOAA Fisheries to go through all of them. The NOAA Fisheries prepared the final rule package and sent it to the Department of Commerce, where NOAA Fisheries sits, and that was sent in the fall of 2023. But because of the scope of the rule, it's subject to executive order. And so the rule package was then sent to the Office of Management and Budget in March of 2024, and then that review period is usually about 90 days. So when it's at OMB or Office of Management and Budget, you can request executive order meetings. There have been several requested already from various members of Congress, NGOs, and industry members. I haven't checked it this week, but when I looked earlier in May, you could still request meetings to, I guess, ask questions or talk about any of the concerns that you would have. It's not clear at this point when and if the final rule will be issued, and it's still sitting in OMB at this moment. If there are additional questions, most of them really should be directed to NOAA Fisheries. Caroline Good is the contact there. Certainly I would be happy to provide, a conduit for those conversations if you would need them. But Caroline Good would be the point of contact. She's in Silver Spring, Maryland. I've provided her contact information here. And I hope that is kind of what you were hoping for today.
That was exactly what I was hoping for today.
Good.
Right.
Good.
I appreciate you doing that. Does anybody have any questions that she might could field right now? I'm curious on why they lowered the boat length to be part of this. I was under the impression that most of the interactions were with freighters. Do you have any idea why they did lower the boat length?
There was an interaction, I think it was off Florida, that was with a smaller vessel. I can't remember the exact size, but it was within this 35 to 65-foot range, and it was a calf. And so I know that was part of the equation of why they reduced the length. I have heard, I shouldn't say that, I've heard, but I haven't seen for sure, that some of the boat manufacturers lowered the length from building boats at 65 feet to building them at 64 feet. And so, out of the spirit of what the original rule was meant to do. But I think bringing it down to 35 was based on some specific interactions that had occurred.
Okay, so you only know of one interaction in this size group?
I only know of one,
Okay.
but that doesn't mean that there
That's
was
other
just
than
one.
one.
Is that fair?
Commissioner Roller.
So when we were briefed on this at the South Atlantic Council, I remember they had their the study they did to look at vessel strikes, and I may be remembering this wrong. That would probably be a good paper to get to this commission. I think there was multiple small boat strikes. If I remember correctly, there was a boat under 20 foot that hit one. So
Maybe so.
it may, I mean, I might be
Yeah.
remembering that wrong, but it's like there was a lot of information. But you're right. Most of them were large boats. Yeah.
So I know online, NOAA Fisheries, their Right Well webpage has some, overview. Obviously, the proposed rule has many details. But the online does have some overview of some of the things that went into the proposed rule changes. And I'd be happy to find that website and share it with you if
That would be good.
helpful.
That would be good.
Okay.
And one other reason I wanted this to be brought up today is that in case we felt like a letter from the commission, needs to go to NOAA or not, because this is going to have a impact on especially the charter boat fishing industry. And, if the commission wants me to formulate with staff a letter for it, against it, what have you, I'd be glad to do that, but I need to hear from the commission on that. Go ahead.
I would love to make a motion to formulate a letter against it. I don't know that it'll help, but
And it probably won't, but,
I guess I'll make a motion to formulate a letter against
okay.
the current plan.
Okay.
Second.
And second by Commissioner Hobgood. Is there any discussion on this? Okay. Let's do a roll call vote. Go ahead, Jesse.
Commissioner Bethea,
Aye.
Commissioner Blanton,
Abstain.
Commissioner Corbett,
Yes.
Commissioner Gardner, Commissioner Hobgood, Commissioner Huggins, Commissioner Rader,
Abstain.
Commissioner Roller,
Abstain.
Chairman Bizzle.
Aye. Motion passes without dissension. Okay, I'll get together with staff and formulate a letter stating our concern on this proposal. Okay, thank you very much. Commissioner Roller.
Just clarification, my vote was an abstain.
Abstain, yeah.
Commissioner
Yeah.
Blanton.
I pulled up the right whale collision paper, and I just wanted to read a line from it.
Please.
From the 37 records between 1999 and 2012, sufficient information was available to evaluate 18 injury cases. Of these, 11 cases, 61 involved small vessels under 65 foot in length, 3 involved vessels under or over 65 foot, and 4 were the results of vessel strikes greater than 65 foot in length. I'll send that report to you. And I'm not making a justification one way or another.
Sure.
I'm just making the presentation here that was provided to the council and whatnot. I personally believe that these restrictions would cause more harm to the community who wants to protect whales than they would be, just due to general anger
Right.
from how strict they are.
Gotcha. Okay. All right, moving right along. We're going to have an information presentation on blue catfish. Robert?
All right, well, hello again, Commission. My name is Robert Corbett. I'm a biologist out of the Elizabeth City office, and I'm here today with Charlton Godwin, biologist supervisor out of the Elizabeth City office. Today, we will quickly be reviewing key life history parameters of blue catfish. We will then go over trends of some of our independent data collected by the division before digging into some of the research coming out of the Chesapeake Bay that may help North Carolina as we move forward dealing with this invasive species issue. These topics will include biological research and management. Lastly, we will then get into some of the recently applied federal legislation affecting the processing of catfish, which has led to an unintended consequences, including deflating of the markets for blue catfish caught in North Carolina waters, financially harming harvesters, and indirectly affecting other fish species. So, to begin, the life history of blue catfishes vary between region, environmental, and ecological conditions. In general, blue catfish are thought to live 9 to 10 years. However, catfish in the Chesapeake Bay and in Lake Norman have been caught up to 25 years old. In the Albemarle Sound, we have had 9 and 10-year-old fish around 2010, before the population became what it is today. Thus, it's likely the fish in the Albemarle Sound may live over 20 years as well. Blue catfish mature between the ages of 4 and 7, with females producing between 2,000 to 4,000 eggs per pound of body weight. So to put this into perspective, a 10-pound fish could produce upwards of 40,000 eggs. Blue catfish typically spawn between May and June in low salinity waters with little turbulence, and the males will guard the nest to increase the survival rates of the offspring. They tolerate poor water quality conditions, high nutrient levels, varying salinity levels, and prolonged periods with limited prey availability. So blue catfish are native to the Mississippi, the Missouri, and the Ohio rivers, and were introduced in areas outside the native range in the 1960s, including Lake Norman, the Petey River system, and the James River in Virginia. This map from the USGS Non-Indigenous Aquatic Species Database shows the blue catfish native range in brown and introduced range in maroon. Blue catfish were introduced in waters outside the natural range to enhance local fisheries and have since spread through the natural range expansions. Fisheries managers stocking and anglers themselves moving them between different waterways. It's also to believe that blue catfish escaped from fish farms during the flooding events. Although blue catfish have been collected in North Carolina's coastal rivers for many years, their numbers have increased dramatically and fairly recently as well, particularly in the Albemarle Sound. So displayed here is from our Albemarle Sound Independent Gillnet Survey. Blue catfish have been present in the Albemarle Sound since the 1990s and likely earlier than that. But their population levels weren't enough to truly be captured through the Independent Gillnet Survey until 2008. And their catch rates have increased dramatically since that time. So on this index displayed, the x-axis on the bottom represents the year, and the y-axis to the left represents the catch per unit effort. As you can see, the catch has gradually been increasing. For context, in 2019, this survey caught 6,304 blue catfish. So moving on, commercial landings have also appeared to be increasing. Please note that this figure provides the North Carolina Trip Ticket Program includes all catfish, not just blue catfish. On this figure, year again is on the x-axis, and the y-axis is pounds of commercial landing of all catfish. As you can see, the commercial landings for North Carolina are primarily from the Albemarle Sound and its tributaries. The Currituck Sound, the Roanoke River, which are represented in this figure in blue. The rest of the state's landing are in orange. Based on the division's fish house sampling, the high landing levels in the 90s were mostly driven by channel cats and whites, while increased landings have been driven in recent years by blue catfish. Catfish are mostly landed using hoop nets, fight nets, pound nets, gill nets, and trout lines. To clarify, this graph has combined all the gill nets into one group encompassing all mesh sizes, whether it's floating, sinking, anchored, drift, or run-around net. As you can see, the amount of catfish being caught in the gill nets is steadily increasing. Also, I believe it's good to point out the drastic increase that we can see in trout line use around 2021. And that can actually better be shown in this figure here. So just to clarify on this figure, the light blue line is trout lines, where the dark blue lines are gill nets. So moving on, recreationally, blue catfish are extremely popular and still increasing in popularity, being targeted as a sports fish fishery, a subsistence fishery, and a trophy fishery. There are groups throughout North Carolina coastal that hold monthly tournaments targeting large catfish. In fact, some of the charter captains in the Albemarle Sound have started targeting blue catfish for their clients. The increase in population size and the expansion of habitat is not only in North Carolina. Blue catfish populations have also been increasing in the Chesapeake Bay. This has led to increased research, particularly out of Virginia. One of the most important areas of research of any invasive species is diet content. In the Chesapeake Bay, blue catfish were found to consume 2 to 5% of their body weight a day. The most common prey item found in their diet of blue catfish in the Chesapeake Bay was invasive Asian clams. Other species of interest were white perch, gizzard shad, blue crab, American eel, and threadfin shad. Also consumed was American shad and river herring, but to a much lesser degree, which was thought to be due to the low population levels. One study even found evidence of Atlantic sturgeon and striped bass to be present, but this was at extremely low levels. Essentially, blue catfish are opportunistic feeders, and their diet consists of species that are common in the system they inhabit, while less frequently encountered species in diet studies are not typically common and are only in the system seasonally. In our independent gillnet survey in the Albemarle Sound, technicians have been seeing mostly Rangia clams, followed by white perch. Other prey items include Atlantic menhaden, gizzard shad, river herring, and American shad. And I would like to note here that currently there are several universities conducting diet studies in the Albemarle Sound. Another area of research in the Chesapeake Bay was salinity tolerance. In the Chesapeake Bay, blue catfish have been captured in salinities as high as 22 parts per thousand. For reference, full seawater is 35 parts per thousand. While blue catfish cannot stay in salinities that high for extended periods of time, their ability to travel through these areas has allowed them to spread to many tributaries of the Chesapeake Bay. Another area of research was abundance. And in some areas of the Chesapeake Bay, in the Tidal James and the Rappahannock rivers, blue catfish outweighed all other fish species caught and were estimated to comprise up to 75% of the total fish biomass. In the James River, there was an estimated 1.6 million blue catfish in a 7.5-mile study area. That is 213,333 fish per linear river mile. That is about 40 catfish per linear foot. So another research in the Chesapeake Bay has focused on impacts to native species. In some areas of the Chesapeake Bay, populations of white catfish have declined as blue catfish populations have increased and expanded. In one diet study, blue crabs were present to such a high degree that the researchers suggested a population impact study for blue crabs. While American shad and river herring were not present in large quantities in these diet studies, researchers are concerned that due to the large population sizes and high feeding rates of blue catfish, they could impact the recovery of those species in some of these areas, but it's unknown to what extent. The popularity of blue catfish as a trophy and a sports fishery have led to competing management objectives in the Chesapeake Bay. Recreational fishers targeting trophy catfish do not want to see an increase in the commercial harvest, which has led to a maximum harvest size limit in Virginia, Chesapeake Bay waters. In Virginia, only one fish over 32 inches may be kept for both the commercial and recreational fisheries. Imposing these maximum size limits on invasive species to promote trophy fisheries hinders the work of conservation groups trying to control the invasive species and leads to confusing messages to the public on how to deal with the invasive species. In Maryland, there is no restrictions on blue catfish, and the state encourages harvest by opening tidal waters to jug lines and permitted commercial trout lines. So due to the issues surrounding the invasive catfish in the Chesapeake Bay program convinced a work group which put together a list of recommendations for managing the invasive species. The lack of coordinated directives from management agencies in the Chesapeake Bay led to recommendations of the need to consist with regulations. Additionally, educating the public and anglers to retain, kill, and capture blue catfish rather than releasing them was suggested. Continued, and more constant monitoring of blue catfish populations in order to determine the migration strategies are working on populations and expandings was suggested. In areas with new invasions, targeted removals was suggested to try to stop the expansions. Finally, increasing commercial harvest and developing new fisheries was suggested to help controlling the invasive catfish populations. In the Chesapeake Bay, consumer awareness was increased by promoting catfish at outreach events, seafood festivals, and holding blue catfish derbies. Additionally, blue catfish from the Chesapeake Bay were added to Monterey Bay Seafood Watch report as best choice. Supply chains were expanded in grocery stores, such as Whole Foods, and in Maryland to state-owned institutions, such as correctional facilities, schools, universities, and hospitals. However, hindering these newly expanded markets and some of the recently adopted federal regulations known as the 2008 and 2014 Farm Bills. These bills, which were passed by the United States Congress, mandated that the process of both domestic and imported catfishes fall under the jurisdiction of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the USDA. Through the 2008 and 2014 Farm Bills, the Food and Safety Inspection Services, commonly referred to as the FSIS, a department under the USDA, amended the Federal Meat Inspection Act, mandating inspections of all catfishes. This is commonly referred to as the Siluriformes Act, referring to all catfish species. The regulations put in place by these farm bills requires that the processing facility be up to USDA standards and an in-person inspector examine the catfish before they go to market. At this time, I would also like to point out that catfishes are the only fishes inspected by the USDA. Food safety for all other fish species are under the jurisdiction of the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA. Let's go down. According to the Wall Street Journal, the inspection process was put in place by a group of Southern congressmen that were seeking to limit the market on Vietnamese catfish in order to protect the domestic market of farm-raised catfish. Regardless, as of March 1st, 2016, the Food and Safety and Inspective Services was transferred full jurisdiction over all wild-caught and farm-raised Siluriformes that are harvested and sold for human consumption in the United States. Since its creation, this bill has put a burden on fishermen up and down the coast, especially North Carolina fishermen. Currently in the Albemarle Sound, we only have one facility able to process blue catfish under these new regulations. This somewhat limits the ability of fish houses to process all the catfish that could be harvested in North Carolina, even if they had a market. Processing requirements, such as in-person inspectors, require time, affects logistics, limits storage capabilities, cuts into profits, lowering the market value, and inevitably limits harvest. Harvest of an invasive species, which all data indicates population size of blue catfish are increasing, and the range is steadily expanding, causing unknown issues to other native species which inhabit North Carolina waters and contest for the same resources. So in conclusion, blue catfish are an invasive species that have the potential of having huge negative impacts on coastal North Carolina ecosystem. We do not know to what extent due to the lack of published and direct research from this state. To help address our the Commercial Fishing Resource Funding Committee, which funds various research projects related to commercial fisheries in North Carolina, recently put a call for proposed projects focused on blue catfish abundance and economic impacts in the Albemarle Sound. While it is highly unlikely there is a way to eradicate blue catfish from the coastal rivers of North Carolina, increasing harvest may help control catfish populations and potentially prevent further range expansions. However, federal regulations affecting the process of catfishes has led to unintended consequences, including deflating of the markets for blue catfish caught, markets which are already overwhelmed with an influx of catfish. Lastly, outreach and public education will be vital to increasing harvest and consumer demand. And with that, we'll be glad to take any questions.
Questions and comments? Commissioner Rowland.
So, true freshwater commercial fisheries exist throughout the country, but they're nowhere near as big as saltwater fisheries. My question for you is, I've had trouble finding if there's any health studies being done to look at chemical loads like PFAS and PFAS in this fish. Are you aware of anything being done in the Chesapeake or here in North Carolina to look at if these are safe for human consumption?
Other than, so no, sir, I'm not aware of any in Chesapeake Bay. I think they did some research on a wide range of fish species in the Cape Fear River relative to PFAS, but I'm not aware of any specific studies looking at any, toxin loads for blue catfish.
In the Cape Fear study basically said shouldn't eat anything from the Cape Fear, that they're really bad. So we're right, correct?
I'm not 100% sure exactly what the results were, but that sounds about right. There were some limitations for consumption, monthly consumption or something.
They're very severe. And I mean, the EPA released that study a couple years ago saying that exposure to PFAS and PFAS, one of the biggest exposures were from people eating freshwater fish. And so I guess that's a big concern that I have, that here in the Mid-Atlantic, we're trying to promote this fishery, but we're not asking if they're safe for eat. Now, it's very personal for me. I'm a lymphoma survivor, and you can't turn on a radio without hearing ads for if you lived at Camp Lejeune between these periods of time and had any of these types of blood cancers from the water contamination. So I wouldn't wish what I went through on anybody. So I guess it's just a concern of mine as we promote these fisheries. I want to make sure that what we're providing is safe to eat. And in all my research, I can't find who's supposed to be doing these consumption advisory studies. As everyone points fingers at one another. Health and Human Services doesn't do it. We don't do it. So I just want to make sure I state that on the record. And I'm not saying, just to be clear, I know that people are very passionate. It's clear that we're having a huge impact on the environment here and the population of these is growing. But we probably have to find other means of which to do something with these fish. And just putting them out on the market to eat may not be the best thing to do.
Yes, Commissioner Rader.
Yeah, I think maybe the Indians had the right idea with fertilizer from fish. Robert, would you repeat what you said about the request for proposals related to the Albemarle Sound? Whose request was that, and what's the status of that, do you know?
Can you repeat that, the request?
Yeah, you mentioned that there was a request for proposals that had gone out for studies in the Albemarle Sound of, ecological, whatever it was for. I missed who issued that and where the money's coming from, what it's for. And what I'm thinking about is how we might, that seems like a great place for APNEP, for instance, to do some of the work we would like to see done, or we and the Wildlife Commission together on joint waters to look at, along the lines of Chesapeake Bay multi-species studies. And I'm thinking about the recovery of river herrings and shads, and also the blue crab management and other things. I have no idea how we do that without actively. We don't have the science to do that, to take in those things into account. And so I just wondered what money, what resources is available. And I thought I heard you said that there was a study, a set of studies being considered or something like that.
Yeah,
Did I mishear that?
So currently in the Albemarle Sound, there is a study being going on by Dr. Jim Morley and Dr. Fred Scharf, and they're looking at the stomach contents of blue catfish. They're going out in different areas and different ranges of the Albemarle Sound during different time periods, capturing these fish and then coming back to the office and then doing stomach content analysis.
Follow up? Do you know who funded the study and for what purpose?
Yeah, so it was the Commercial Resource Fund, and it was specifically for looking at diet, the diet of blue
Yeah, I
catfish.
probably should have known that.
It was a few years ago when it was
Okay.
approved, and they've just started working the last year or so, and they, out of Wanchese and Wilmington both, and so.
So, Mr. Chairman, it just seems like a great place for us to continue building our relationships with the Wildlife Commission and also with ABNEP and others mediated through the CHIP to bring some of these issues forward in terms of priority and in terms of investment by federal entities that might be partners.
Duly noted.
I just wanted to, I don't know what else might be being done, but it would be really interesting to see.
Director?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to get back to Commissioner Roller's comment, Jesse sent me this link to a news release that the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services put out last year in July. And for American shad, and this is for the Cape Fear River, Middle and Lower Cape Fear River, due to forever chemicals. American shad, blue catfish, and channel catfish for women of childbearing age, pregnant women, nursing mothers, and children. It is no more than 1 meal per year combined across all species. And for American shad, blue catfish, and channel catfish, no more than 7 meals per year combined across all species. And again, that was from their news release last year in July.
Okay, yes. Commissioner Rowland.
Thank you for that. I would need them. Question, channel cats aren't native to these river systems either, are they?
No, technically, they're also Mississippi River drainage, so they would be native to the PD system and maybe the, whatever, North Carolina river systems west of the mountains drain into
They
the.
just don't have the impact.
They don't seem to have the same ecological impacts that blue catfish have had. You know, they've probably also were introduced into the Atlantic slope basins in the 70s, but no, they don't, they don't get as large. Flathead catfish, too, are also have issues. They have not made it to the Albemarle Sound area yet, but, I think they're in all the other coastal river systems, so it's probably, unfortunately, only a matter of time before flathead catfish are in the Albemarle system as well.
There's a lot of flatheads in the news. Do we believe that the catfish could be feeding out of the reservoirs, like Roanoke Rapids, Gaston, Kerr, down the river? Do we know that? Is that where they came from?
Yeah, I think they are, for sure. I mean, they are some, I'm not sure that's now, they just obviously have breeding populations all over the Albemarle Sound, but certainly some of them do come out from the Roanoke River, Gaston, Roanoke Rapids, Kerr system.
And I guess that's my point is if we're trying to do stuff to remove them from the system, shouldn't we also be doing stuff upstream? That's my point.
So in just a couple of those reservoirs, the Wildlife Commission does have only one fish over 32, but not in the coastal systems in their inland waters. They do not have any regulation like that. So we really don't have the same issue in Virginia with their inland fisheries here. So the Wildlife Commission is also in the coastal systems. They are encouraging harvest of blue catfish.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Commissioner Blanton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, multiple times you've heard me bring this to the table just as concern, as a growing concern. And I've been asked many times, what do we do? And so, I think the state of North Carolina needs to take initiative, make an initiative to a multi-agency legislative involvement to the highest degree to consider funding for all of the things that we can do to alleviate the pressures that these fishes are putting on our native species. And that's to address concerns of Commissioner Roller, health concerns. Are these fish legitimately able to be eaten? A dinner plate size fish is not 20, 30 pound a dinner plate sized fish is relatively young and a lot of times have not taken up that same amount of bad stuff. There are fertilizer markets that could be entertained to not have to funnel everything into a, processing facility that can only handle so much per day. We can entertain grants to help build a processing facility or two that could maintain a higher level of, processing capabilities. If you notice, Maryland, man, they have really sat down at the table and talked about this, and they are funneling it into the correctional facilities, the school systems, this, that, and other. So there has to be some things that have been done to certify that these fish are able to be used as table fare. They are currently, lots of fish going into processing facilities every day. That are going to table fare, and like you said, if you notice, the Monterey Bay, which is hard on everybody, even says this is best choice. So I have concerns beyond just the catfish itself. I have concerns of user conflicts in the commercial fisheries that would pursue these fishes. So I feel like this conversation is a whole lot bigger beyond this table. However, this commission could play a huge role in informing and in helping guide, being that, we have the staff and the division to, help us and bring us information if, this commission decides to continue to pursue options to help the Albemarle Sound out. I'm not sure where to go from here. I know there's formalities that probably need to be addressed, legislators that need to be informed, county commissioners that need to be informed that, the river systems and the sound that they, that are within their borders, contain these issues. As a commercial fisherman myself, I personally have an issue with the amount of abundance that's out there, blue catfish wise, because these fish have to have something to eat, and I have personally witnessed them spit up soft crabs, flounders, herons. You just go down the list. They've spit them out. I think Marine Patrol could even attest to the same thing, because I've heard boys. In the springtime when them herons are running up there and they're catching these catfish, they're spitting up herons in the bottom of the boat. And it's been, the boys have told me that, you got to be careful, because, we ain't allowed to have a heron anyway. And, old Marine Patrol pulls up to the boat and they done spit 4 or 5 up out in the floor. And, oh my goodness, So anyway, these things are a burden is what I'm trying to get at. And so, like I said, user conflicts are starting to occur with gears of, for instance, blue crabs and these long lines with hooks on them. Crab pots and these long lines with hooks on them. Fishermen are, as you see, where it was interesting, the data that came about, through the gear data of how the fishermen took initiative to learn how to use a new gear. And so if you notice how trot lines were used previously, very minimally, they took off with that. And when they figured it out, man, they really figured it out. And so now it's become a lot more prevalent. However, the issues with catfish and hooks are they don't bite hooks all the time. There's certain time frames where they really bite them, and there's other time frames where they won't even hardly sniff on them. And so you had to, there's mitigate, we had to try to find ways to mitigate that stuff. So like I said, what I'm trying to get at here is that I believe that North Carolina is at due time to really take a good look at this and really make a good, strong list of priorities, kind of like what you do with the CHIP and any resource priorities with any FMP. I think the FMP process could even possibly be used somewhat, and I'm not sure. I'd have to sit down with staff to really understand what ways we can use FMPs other than, for our native species managements. But I do know that there is a more widespread use of an FMP, and I'm not even sure if we've ever done one beyond the native species. So that would be interesting to look at and to consider. So I'm not sure what to ask of from this point forward. I don't know if the director has met with her staff to bring any ideas to the table. But at this point, if the guys that sit in Elizabeth City have brainstormed anything or any path forward, I know the Chesapeake Bay has a task force, which they have. I saw that they had included some data there that, those research recommendations of increased commercial consumer outreach, angler educations, that's all in that task force stuff, because I've read through some of it. So, it looks like they've done due diligence there. But I can't point out the fact that these fish exist, okay, at a very high level. They're very prevalent. There's no day that I go out there and don't at least see one. They'll swim in a crab pot, especially with a soft crab in it. That if you got crabs shedding, they're going in there to eat them. So I've had testament from the public that I don't even know these people, and we get to talk about fishing and blue catfish, and they'll say, yeah, I caught one wherever, and I had cut it open, had 20 little crabs in it, or it had such and such in it, or they're slammed full of clams so much that they float up to the surface and die because they can't even pass them. That's how much they consume. They're very greedy fish. And so there's a lot more to learn, for the commissioners to learn, I think. But this is a serious issue, and it's hard to really, as one person, try to really understand how we can move forward as a state, as a whole, to try to help, the Albemarle Sound in particular and all its tributaries. So anyway, I'd love to hear, a little bit from the director and of any ideas that her staff and herself have sort of brainstormed, and maybe any ideas of moving forward. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Director?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your comments, Commissioner Blanton, and this is something that we have had some discussions on, and the staff has done a good job at kind of compiling this. And we have had some brief discussions about potential fishery management plan or some route to go with this. I think the rub here is that there are currently no harvest restrictions, from us and from the commission on this. Gear restrictions obviously impacted some. The marketing issues are big for this, and to Commissioner Roller's point, the safety of the fish is a concern. So this is a lot of different things that are at play here, some in the commission's wheelhouse, some not. And this kind of issue is kind of tough to get to, because what do you do? Short of what Maryland's doing, putting up signs asking people, to sacrifice all the blue catfish that they come in contact with. So this is a hard thing to do, but I do think, and staff can I was going to say slap me, tell me if I'm wrong, or tell me just to be quiet, but I think we can continue conversations with our state partners for sure to see, and I know Robert is our invasive species leads, and he meets with people on this topic quite a bit, but we can continue to have those conversations. I don't know if we have talked to APNEP about any of this. So we can continue to look into this issue and have conversations with our state partners, as well as maybe even some of our federal partners to see, because I think up in Maryland, there's some work going on with the feds over catfish, if I'm not mistaken. But at any rate, we can continue to look at, into this from our point, because we do share the same concerns about blue catfish and their obvious population increase and the impacts it's having on the other species, particularly in the Albemarle Sound area, but getting even further east to the things that the fisheries that we are concerned about and trying to recover. So we do recognize this as a concern.
Thank you. That's one of the reasons I asked for this presentation today. We need to at least start the conversation on that. Commissioner Roller.
Thank you, Chair. I want to underline one of Commissioner Blanton's great points, was that this is a bigger conversation, right? It's a bigger problem. And the point I'm trying to get at is it's more than just trying to put more fish on the market. We need to be having a bigger discussion about what to do with this big ecological issue that we're facing. And it's not just, like I said, put more fish on the market. We have a lot of questions to ask. And there are other models out there. We need to be alerting our state and federal legislatures as this issue becomes bigger and bigger, particularly in North Carolina, Virginia, and Maryland combined. You know, an example I would give, something that I'm familiar with, is there's a subsidized fishery in Kentucky, a gillnet fishery, to remove Asian carp from the Ohio River. I spent a lot of my life in the Ohio River, and when I'm driving across northern Kentucky along, you'll get in some of these small towns, and I think I'm in Harkers Island all of a sudden. There's gillnet boats, and it's really funny. But a lot of that is done to try to remove some of these invasive species from this area. So there are models out there, and we just need to be raising awareness, because those carp from the Ohio River, they're not going to the food markets, right? So there's other things that you can do, whether it's fertilizer or whatnot, and those are some of the things we need to be alerting people to.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Rader.
Yeah, I do think that there are some models out there to begin to use. One is that FMPs have in fact been used for non-traditional species in many places. So South Atlantic Council, when I was heavily involved, put in place a FMP for sargassum. For hard corals, soft corals, both harvested and not harvested, for in the Caribbean and Gulf for ornamental fish that are harvested and not harvested, and for a lot of other things. It does make it interesting on how you set goals, reference points, because you would need ecological and population level guidance on what success looks like. But I think we could absolutely do that if we wanted to go that route. Need more information to do it, and I do believe that at the Albemarle Pamlico National Estuary Program, and just for the record, I was the first executive director of that program, is very well positioned to coordinate and fund those kinds of investigations, including the social and economic trade-offs among different pathways. That's really what they're all about, and they have the advisory committees across the board of people to do that. In fact, Mr. Chairman, I'd be glad, as a personal matter, in service to you and the commission, to consult with the director and staff with APNEP about what we might begin to do to pull that information together. Now, I served on that technical committee for many, many, many years, but not recently. So I'll be glad to do that if you would like me to do that.
I'll put that in the director's lap.
But just the last thing is that, given the relationships and funding there, they're brothers and sisters with the Chesapeake Bay program, the interstate program with Virginia and Maryland, and in that case also the Potomac River Commission, for looking at management of living resources harvested and not. And so I think it would be interesting to try to tap into those multi-state, interstate, and even coastwide processes to begin thinking about some of those outside-the-box opportunities and blending not just the sort of ecological pathways, but the social pathways and economic pathways in as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I think, anything else you want, Commissioner Blanton?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, just one more
No problem.
moment here. I appreciate it. So one thing that I would like to ask of the division, if they would oblige of an immediate concern that I do feel like is well within the realm of the division, and hopefully it wouldn't be too big of an ask, but I would like to start addressing the user conflict issues that I have seen arise through the setting of hooks around crab pot gears. And, crab pot, and I'll try to give a little justification here. Crab pots are prevalent and at certain times of the year for a elongated period of time, mostly, we'll say, from March to September, October, November. As the fishermen have started to develop these trot line gears, there's no standard It's kind of just, they make something at whatever lengths, at whatever amount of dobs, at whatever amount of hooks, at whatever they feel. And these lines are extremely mobile. And they can show up on you overnight and set all these lines all in your crab pots. And they assume that everything's going to be hunky-dory and you're not going to get hung up in any of it. You're not going to pull one into your prop. You're not going to do any of that. Well, the wind blows, it gets rough. You pulling stuff in, ropes into your prop. These hooks are hooked into these crab pot lines, and you pull this, and you don't even know it's in your line, in your crab pot line. You put it in your pot puller, and you pull it, and there's a hook in the line, and it pulls it up into your pot puller, and there's hooks coming at you. And so there is safety issues here involved. And so I would like to formally address this and get out ahead of it before it becomes a major issue and somebody truly gets hurt beyond this thing. So that's just an ask of me, or from me, as a commissioner, for the safety of the fishermen out there and the concern of user conflicts, to sort of figure out, this fine line of how we can coexist. And that's kind of where I'm at with that. Otherwise, I would hope that, we could probably just continue this conversation throughout and have, maybe small updates as a commission, and to get updated as to where we can start having more elongated conversations and with who, and, federal agencies and finding monies and all these ideas to come together. I would hope that we could find a process to do that as well. And so, anyway, those are my two immediate concerns. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sure thing, thank you. Process has got to start somewhere, so I think this is a good start. So, yeah. Thank you for your presentation. Excuse me, Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Catherine's texting me cheat notes. Hold on. I just want to say, relative to the user conflict, the commission does have a user conflict rule, and we can have some internal discussions about that and how we may use that for this situation, or if we have other ideas about how to address the conflicts that you're talking about, Commissioner Blanton, we can come back at the next meeting and kind of talk about what our discussions have been, and as you said, continue to keep the commission updated on the work on this issue that we're doing.
Yeah, that sounds great. Like I said, I'm just trying to finesse this out and just see, to make sure, out of a safety concern, out of a, concern for fairness for each user. Certainly not fair for a crabber to go out there and show up the next morning and a line's all in his gear, and he's got to deal with that, and then he loses a day of work, and then, he might upset the man with the line, with all these hooks that he took the time to build, and because he's cutting his gear out of it, and, I hate that. I truly do. And so, I just kind of want to come to an understanding between gear users here before this really gets carried away and somebody either gets mad and does something bad to somebody else because they feel like, they got something bad done to them. There's all kinds of issues that could arise from this. Safety issues, sinking a boat because of lines in the doggone prop in rough water, just all kinds of things. So anyway, I appreciate the time on this, Mr. Chairman, and putting it on this as an agenda item so we could really kind of formally talk about all this.
Sure thing, absolutely. Now, thank you for your presentation. It was very informative. Well, we're coming up close to the end of our meeting. Do we have any issues from our fellow commissioners that we want to see addressed going down the road, or any concerns or anything? I can always count on about 3 people here. Commissioner Roller.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to follow up and reinstate my interest in looking at the enforceability of South Atlantic for hire permits, and also perhaps doing some education and outreach to our for hire captains about what permits they need.
Yeah, Commissioner Roller, that issue will be coming back to the commission in August.
Anybody else? Well, great. Jesse, can you give us a recap of the meeting assignments and our preview for future agenda items as we have them?
Certainly can, Chairman Bizzle. I actually get to say something that's not just y'all's names now. All right, so there was a request that the commission be briefed on the status of coast-wide governance of climate change and the discussions taking place at the council level regarding that topic. In reference to shellfish leases, there was a request to know how many people are using the Australian longline system or a system similar to that and what the requirements are for those types of operations. There was also a request for the division to use the SAV layer, shellfish bottom layer, and navigation channel layer to help get an actual usable number of available acres for shellfish leasing. There was a request that the division continue working with state and regional partners to address blue catfish management, as well as a request that the division begin looking into addressing the user conflict issues concerning the use of trot lines. There was a motion requesting the division develop an issue paper for Atlantic Bonito management, including landings information and proposed rule language. There was also a motion for the MFC to send a letter expressing concern about the proposed rule addressing vessel strikes on North Atlantic right whales. And on that note, I'll also be sending the commission the issue paper that Commissioner Roller referenced that was presented to the South Atlantic. I'll be sending that after this meeting. And at your August meeting, that will take place in Raleigh, and it will be August 21st through the 23rd. And at that meeting, you will receive a presentation on the Southern Flounder Stock Assessment Update. And regarding the Spotted Sea Trout FMP Amendment 1, you will vote to send that draft plan out for advisory committee review. Additionally, you will also vote to send the draft oyster and clam fishery management plans out for AC review as well. You'll hear a presentation on potential adaptive management measures for the blue crab fishery, and you will receive information on the feasibility of state requirements for federal for-hire fishing permits, and you will receive an update on the black drum and sheep's head fisheries, as well as more information on the division's FMP, the division's annual FMP review. And lastly, you will vote on notice of text for a handful of rules, including the false albacore management rule, the simplifying part marking requirements rule, and the Interstate Wildlife Violator Compact rule that you heard about today.
Great, thank you very much. I'd like to thank the staff, Marine Patrol, my fellow commissioners for the work we've done the last few days. I think we got some things accomplished. And with that being said, and no other business to conduct, Jesse,
And
you got something?
As Sean just reminded me, we have a June 6th special meeting at 11 a.m.
Yes.
that's virtual, and just wanted to make sure everybody remembers that.
Right. Get it on your calendars, and I'll see you at that meeting. See you in Raleigh. Hey, we are adjourned.